It is July 1989, and I am watching a Batman film set in his second year in Gotham City, or close enough for government work. The criminal element fears him, but his presence has led to the creation of a deranged supervillain who seems preternaturally gifted at creating elaborate death traps and manipulating the local media. Over the course of the film, Batman realizes that he cannot be a mere symbol of vengeance, since this will only create space for bad faith imitators to act out their own bloody-minded vendettas. The Batman must instead become a symbol of hope to his depressed and depressing city, a symbol of protection, watching over those who still call Gotham home in spite of all its horrors. Watching this film will lead to a lifelong love of comic book superhero stories, which will in turn lead me, inexorably, here. It is July 2008, and I am watching a Batman film set in his second year in Gotham City, or close enough for government work. The criminal element fears him, but his presence has led to the creation of a deranged supervillain who seems preternaturally gifted at creating elaborate death traps and manipulating the local media. Over the course of the film, Batman realizes that he cannot be a mere symbol of vengeance, since this will only create space for bad faith imitators to act out their own bloody-minded vendettas. The Batman must instead become a symbol of hope to his depressed and depressing city, a symbol of protection, watching over those who still call Gotham home in spite of all its horrors. By now, I have read the 13-issue 1996 limited series Batman: The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I can see the bones of Long Halloween sticking out through the Dark Knight's flesh, as I will see the bones of Nightfall and No Man's Land on screen 4 years later, sticking out through the flesh of Dark Knight Rises. It is April 2022, and I am watching a Batman film set in his second year in Gotham City. This time, that's made explicit in the text. The criminal element fears him, but his presence has led to the creation of a deranged supervillain who seems preternaturally gifted at creating elaborate death traps and manipulating the local media. Over the course of the film, Batman realizes that he cannot be a mere symbol of vengeance, since this will only create space for bad faith imitators to act out their own bloody-minded vendettas. The Batman must instead become a symbol of hope to his depressed and depressing city, a symbol of protection, watching over those who still call Gotham home in spite of all its horrors. By now, I have seen the 2-part animated adaptation of The Long Halloween, released direct to Walmart and Target electronics store shelves in June and July of 2021, originally meant to coincide with the original theatrical release date of The Batman, which, in my own house, I have taken to calling definite article Batman, because I am a petty bastard who does not let anything go. I can see the bones of Long Halloween sticking out through this film's flesh, along with many other things. And upon its conclusion, I say to an empty house, well, if you wanted to watch the last 2 Nolan movies in 3 hours instead of 5, here you go, I guess. History lesson time. In 1986, DC Comics pressed the great cosmic reset button for the first time in history with the Crisis on Infinite Earths. The writers, artists, and editors of the various then-current Batman titles collectively figured, well, new continuity, new origin stories for everybody. And over the course of 1987, they published Batman Year 1, Year 2, and Year 3. Year 1 is a fondly remembered classic, still, to this day, despite the cognitive decay of its author, about the formation of Batman's bromance with then-Lieutenant James Gordon, GCPD, as they unite to fight the old Gotham mob families and finally wrest a degree of control of their city away from the mob's corrupting clutches. As such, it served as the foundation stone of many a Batman continuity ever since. You might remember this as the driving force behind the second act of Batman Begins. Or Gotham. Though God help you if Gotham was your first experience with this material. I'm sorry. It's not our fault. We didn't ask for this. This is the world we've been given. We do the best we can with what we have. I mean, you see what they have to work with here. Year 3 got adapted into a very good 2-part episode of Batman the Animated Series called Robin's Reckoning back in 1993. The same year, the bones of Year 2 were used, Mechagodzilla-like, as the basis for building what is still, to this day, the best Batman movie, Mask of the Phantasm. Other than that, nobody wants to remember Year 2, since it depicts a Batman violating several of the rules that internet-enabled comic book nerds consider sacred and inviolate parts of his character. Like losing physical fights, contemplating the offensive use of firearms, and almost giving up the mask entirely for the sake of a hottie we've never heard of before or since, named Rachel. Sound familiar? Well, it should. Her name was not Dawes in the comic books. She did not morph into Maggie Gyllenhaal halfway through, and she did not die via Joker. She got herself to a nunnery, which I guess is better in the sense that she's still alive, but as far as the rest of comics are concerned, she's been as fridge-stuffed as Alex DeWitt. Even we who love Mask of the Phantasm have to remind each other of how much it owes to Year 2. Even though it's about as much as Batman Begins owes to Year 2, if we're being honest. That bit where Bruce almost kills Joe Chill, but then somebody else does it for him? Yeah. Fast forward 9 years, and enter The Long Halloween, a version of Year 2 that actually dealt with Gotham City's transition from perpetual mob movie background to the costumed psychopath playground we all know and love today. Aided, abetted, and physically embodied by the person whom Bats and Gordon try to make the third member of their polycule, District Attorney Harvey Dent, who becomes Two-Face by the end. Sound familiar? Well, it should. I never reviewed Dark Knight when it came out because, quite frankly, I did not want to wade into the Batman discourse of 2008 through 10, let's say. All I really had to offer, and all I really have to offer still, is this incredibly cold take. Dark Knight is Long Halloween without any of the villains that Christopher Nolan either couldn't or didn't want to figure out how to do. Which turned out to be all of them except Two-Face, Joker, and Scarecrow. Regardless, Dark Knight's also the last Batman film that people can pretend was universally beloved in its time, even though it wasn't. All the haters' voices were drowned out back then, and by now their YouTube channels are mostly dead letters. So the executives of the WB, facing a DC universe that they themselves have shattered into many and various overlapping, occasionally contradictory continuities, must have figured, hey, you know that thing we did that's the last thing everybody liked? Well, why don't we just do that again? Only with a new Batman. Batman we haven't driven back into rehab. And without Harvey. And let's swap the Joker for the Riddler. But yeah, then let's bring in the Joker at the end. That way we can tease him for the sequel, like we did last time. And that way, everybody will be happy, except for the biggest pedants on Earth. Idiots who care about themes and subtext and other stuff meant for 8th grade book reports. And really, why would anybody listen to us? Whenever I finally get around to seeing one of these films, one of the things I like to do first is find the biggest haters on my timeline and see what they have to say. I consider it an exercise in intellectual plasticity, a way to practice thinking, shall we say. So having now heard a non-zero amount of haters, hacks, and frustrated independent filmmakers try and fail to find new and novel ways to say, hey, this movie rips off Seven. We have Seven at home, you damn rip-off artists. I am now going to start writing my Congress critters with a new legislative proposal. Be it resolved that henceforth every self-proclaimed film bro, cinephile, and sin eater shall keep no less than one actual comic book reading nerd on retainer for situations exactly like this one. That way, y'all can avoid repeating yourselves so much. And who knows, you might actually formulate a criticism that sinks its teeth into what you're biting at. For example, instead of saying, this movie rips off Seven, and just leaving it at that, as if everybody was there in 1996 when Seven came out, someone who has wasted his life actually doing the reading might say, this movie rips off The Long Halloween, poorly, rushes through Catwoman when in Rome, without going to Rome, so minus a bunch of points there for no Rome, finally finds its own spin on an idea in the third hour, drops that for an action scene, naturally, and then sprinkles a little aftershock on top at the end. Reading all those books in one sitting, not that I would recommend it, but if one were to do that, it would consume at least as many hours of your life as watching this film, and probably be better for your brain. If not your immortal soul. I mean, hell. You sweet summer letterboxed children think you've seen every scene in a Batman film too many times? Try reading this shit for 35 years. And then watch The Gotham Show. A show that pissed some of us off by trying to be year 2 and year 0 at the same time. I'm sorry, but every time one of these comes out, the Batman discourse gets as toxic as the chemical vats that usually make Jokers. And I am not immune. I've been participating in this 100% since before some of you were even alive. Trust me. Like, Jokerification levels have reached red and black plaid. And occasional bouts of evil laughter, but that's been a thing with me since childhood. It's fine. I have my medication. When you have a condition, it's not good to forget your medicine. But still, I get it. Watching this movie feels like watching a Batman highlight reel. Oh, here's a scene where a supervillain kills the commissioner, paving the way for Jim Gordon's eventual rise through the ranks. Oh, here's the scene where Batman and Catwoman flirt. Here's the scene where they team up to fight thugs, whom they thoroughly outclass. Here's the scene where they save each other during the climactic battle. Here's the scene where Batman fails to figure out a clue until it's too late. Here's the obligatory car chase, with no Superman to show up and stop it this time, god damn it. Here's the scene where Batman visits the villain in jail, only to be horrified to find that the villain is actually the lowest breed of scumbag on this earth. A fanboy. Ew. Here's the scene where Bruce Wayne talks to Carmine Falcone, and uncritically accepts whatever Falcone says, because that's a great idea that people should totally do. It's getting so you can't even trust the word of Gotham's Godfather no more. I ask you, what's this stinking city coming to, huh? Next thing you know, we're gonna get sewer zombies. Ah, and here's the scene that casts dispersions upon Thomas and Martha Wayne. the one relatively new wrinkle in modern live-action Batman cinema. Unless, of course, you read 2011's Flashpoint and have been living under a Flashpoint-shaped cloud ever since. Like some of us. Then this, too, is old hat. But as the foundation stone of a new Batman continuity, this movie doesn't have the courage to go as hard as its soundtrack wants to. So it has to immediately walk that shit back via Alfred. At least Joker had the guts to cast dispersions upon Thomas Wayne and then just kinda leave him hanging in the air. Unresolvable and unknowable, thanks to his death. But that might make people, including definite article Batman, uncomfortable. So here's Alfred, Batman's real dad, to tell him what some of us have been yelling at the screen for 5 minutes. You, didn't actually believe what Carmine Falcone told you, did you? What, are you stupid? God, you're a punk. A rank amateur. A costumed errand boy taking orders from Kurt Cobain's ghost. Oh yeah, Batsy, there definitely is something in your way. And that something is yourself. Okay, he doesn't actually say all of that, but you get the gist, right? The use of Nirvana in the trailer and twice in the film itself is instructive, because modern Batman movies are suffering from the same thing that killed rock music in general and Kurt Cobain in particular. This post-crisis Batman of the mid to late 80s rose to prominence as a reaction against and an alternative to the broadly satirical Batman of the 60s and the Scooby-Doo and Super Friends Batman of the 70s. But much like alternative or independent music, modern Batman movies can only now, to quote the Kurt Cobain of dirtbag leftist music and cultural criticism, Mark Fisher, quote, endlessly repeat older gestures of rebellion and contestation, as if for the first time. Alternative and independent don't designate something outside mainstream culture. Rather, they are styles. In fact, the dominant styles within the mainstream. Unquote. Much like this neo-noir Batman has been the dominant strain of Batman since at least 1987. Fisher continues, quote, Cobain knew that he was just another piece of the spectacle, that nothing runs better on MTV than a protest against MTV. Knew that his every move was a cliché scripted in advance. Knew that even realizing it is a cliché. Like postmodern culture in general, Cobain found himself in a world where stylistic innovation is no longer possible, where all that is left is to imitate dead styles, to speak through the mask and with the voices of the styles in the imaginary museum. Here, even success meant failure, since to succeed would only mean that you were the new meat on which the system could feed. But the high existential angst of Nirvana and Cobain belongs to an older moment. What succeeded them was a pastiche rock, which recreated the forms of the past without anxiety. Unquote. And that is definite article Batman in a nutshell. The forms of past Batmen, reproduced without anxiety. After all, most people, normal people, haven't seen a Batman movie since 2017. Of course, Zack Snyder et al. Tried to stylistically innovate by giving us a Batman who'd aged with us in real time. A Batman who'd been alone for 20 years, as his films had been the lone standard bearers of DC Comics at the theaters. If you don't count Shaquille O'Neal's Steel, or Halle Berry's Catwoman, or Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern, or Christopher Reeve, creepy digital simulacrum of Brandon Routh's Superman Returns. Which, you shouldn't. A Batman warped by those 20 years of peerless social isolation into a shape that could only be straightened out again by a Man of Steel. And his fiancée, a woman with big brass balls. A Batman who went, over the course of 2 films, from being a ruthless creature of the night who strikes fear into the hearts of criminals, into a symbol of guileless and optimistic hope. A Batman whose faith was rewarded, and who ends his films still clinging to that hope, not just in spite of, but because of the fact that he is constantly haunted by apocalyptic nightmares of a future that could still very easily come to pass. But why continue that character arc when you can just remake it in one film with an actor you haven't knocked off the wagon yet, and a director who's so blandly inoffensive that he doesn't even have a toxic internet-based anti-fandom yet? Unless you dig really far into Cloverfield or Planet of the Apes fandom, I guess. I'm sure there's some Matt Reeves haters out there somewhere, but I haven't found them yet. Dude has successfully threaded the needle. He's a big-budget franchise filmmaker who clocks in, does the work, gets paid, and gets out, without any vicious rumors about his possible secret political persuasions following him around. I mean, knock on wood, Matt. I'll do a Planet of the Apes retrospective one of these days, and we'll see where you shake out, buddy. Not that I blame him, or anyone else involved. They're all fine. Some, like John Turturro, are clearly phoning their fine in, while others, like Andy Serkis's Alfred and Colin Farrell's Penguin, were fine enough to leave me wanting more. I can't wait to see Jeffrey Wright's Gordon meet the rest of the GCPD cast, or see how he's raising his daughter Barbara, whose film was supposed to come out in 2018, but would have been a Joss Whedon film, so who knows, maybe we dodged a bullet there. And this may, purely by default, be the best live-action Catwoman movie to date. Both because Zoë Kravitz is perfect for the role, and because Catwoman's role here is expanded to something comparable to her role in modern comics. The inciting incident of this plot, the thing that really gets Batman stuck deep into it, is not so much Riddler's murder of the mayor. It's the corrupt Gotham political establishment's murder of the mayor's mistress, who also happens to be Selina's roommate, whom Batman could have saved if he'd stuck to the surveillance detail instead of letting his dick do his thinking for him and follow the hot motorcycle-riding cat burglar off to her latest heist. Not that I blame him either. Here, she is elevated to full partner in the Bat's war on crime, without the need Rise is felt to gesture towards her villainous past with a sudden but inevitable betrayal. No betrayals here. Only sincere arguments between Batman's barely formed, barely articulated kind of virtue ethics and Catwoman's cynical utilitarianism. It's not that this Batman is young, dumb, and full of cum that I object to. It's the fact that this movie treats this as some kind of new revolutionary take on the character, rather than the default mode of Batman movies since at least 2005. In live action, anyway. The cartoons get to fast forward to year 5 or 12 or 10 or whatever. Though the cartoons have a mandatory 90-minute time limit, which is why they chopped Long Halloween into 2 movies. Other than the fact that, Warner Brothers got a Warner Brothers. A friend of mine gave Definite Article Batman a 2 out of 4, which is actually perfect in retrospect, because this really is half a movie. It's a perfectly serviceable, perfectly inoffensive, middle-of-the-road Batman movie that takes absolutely no chances until its last hour. And even then, its only major innovation is to move past Dark Knight's ending and do a 20-minute version of Rises. People seem to like that. And why shouldn't they? It's comforting and familiar after 2 years of the plague and this current year of the plague that we're all supposed to pretend isn't happening. I can now see a future where, much like with Spider-Man, we get a new one of these every 2 years until we die. And at this point in my life, I consider that a grimmer and darker future than anything this side of Batman Beyond. But we're all living in Batman Beyond's future now. A fact even this film acknowledges, by opening on one of Beyond's best ideas, that street gangs of dispirited urban youth are copying the Joker's aesthetics. It's only taken 1 year to happen in this Gotham, instead of 65. But that just reflects the acceleration of everything evil in our own dimension. Riddler's small army of I can't believe it's not 4chan followers do a similar copy-paste job with his aesthetic for the climactic battle. From V for Vendetta to this in 16 short years. Some bemoan this as silly and stupid, even as they, with the other side of their mouths, wish for Adam West to rise from the grave and reclaim the role that made him famous. But I'm fine with it. It's totally in line with my one and only decent critical thesis, that villainy is far more attractive to modern America than heroism. That in a shithole country such as ours, far too many people have made the calm, informed, and ultimately rational decision that it's better to be a monster than to be the monster's victim. Since those are the only two choices for us non-billionaires, might as well pick the one that gives you some agency. Even Bruce Wayne, the one supposedly good billionaire, made a similar choice when he decided to start dressing up like a bat monster. Know who I am? Yeah, you keep saying your vengeance. You say it to everybody. Enough that everybody knows now. Like, dude, we get it. Come on. What happened? Did your parents get shot? What are you, Bruce Wayne? You're Bruce Wayne, ain't you? What I'm not so fine with is the fact that this movie's answer to this problem is even more pat and cliched than a 23-year-old literal Saturday morning cartoon. Literal in my media market. It might have aired at a different time in yours, but for me, 10:30 Saturday morning from 1999 to 2000, boom, Batman Beyond. Hell yeah. Let's go. Yes, definite article Batman says, all of the civic institutions in our society are hopelessly corrupted and broken. Their radioactive decay throwing off monsters, the same way plutonium throws off neutrons and gamma rays. But you can't become disillusioned with those institutions, oh no. You have to double down and triple down on their legitimacy, and believe in them even harder. Trust me, the surviving mayoral candidate says in what little of her political rhetoric we get to hear. Because, geez, if we saw any more, she might actually have to make a political commitment of some kind, and God knows we can't have that. This time, the union of good politicians, good civil servants, and the one actual good billionaire in town, if not in the entire world. I mean, I guess there's Ollie and Ted Kord, but good luck getting movies made out of them. Surely this will save everybody this time. As if this wasn't exactly the same bill of goods somebody probably sold to a slightly younger Thomas Wayne. And as if the joke, that's not really a joke, oh, another supervillain brought to you by a grant from the Wayne Foundation, isn't also almost 30 years old by this point. And so it goes, and will continue to go on forever. An endless march of 2 out of 4s. Completely unremarkable mediocrities going hell-bent for the horizon. And that's the best we can actually hope for. Unless, of course, they restore the Snyderverse. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked this video, hit the like button and the subscribe button. And if you really like this video, then consider supporting the show on Patreon. like the fine people whose names I'm about to read to you right now. Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The Aftermovie Diner, and Stu G. Next time, we're going to go exploring some classics.